The 1964 song, Sound of Silence, with lyrics by Paul Simon, was a flop. The words were said to be the existential angst of a post-adolescent. Words like people talking without speaking, people hearing without listening, people writing songs that voices never hear. Listeners were said to break out in raucous laughter as the first chords were played. And it's no wonder that the duo of Simon and Art Garfunkel split up and went back to their respective studies. Now, this song might be one that some of you don't remember. You may be too young to remember it, but I assure you there are many recordings of it available on YouTube. Yet a mere year later, after the duo broke up, the producer of the recording noticed that it was being aired by late-night radio in Boston. And it seems that existential angst struck a chord, so to speak, among students at Tufts and at Harvard. And it followed them down the East Coast to spring break in Florida. After a remix, the song climbed to the top of the charts and was named the most listened to song in all of the 20th century. It became identified with the Vietnam-era protest songs, even though it was written prior to that time. 50 years later, in 2015, a new cover by a heavy metal band called Disturbed was released to great success, pointing toward its meaning that refused to confine itself to just one era. In fact, had recordings and radio existed in the ancient world, I expect that this song might have struck a chord with the prophet Elijah, too, as he huddled in the darkness of his cave. His despondence might seem odd, since he had recently pulled off a tremendous victory, a miracle, really, as he defeated the prophets of Baal and converted all of the followers to Yahweh. Why then would he be so distraught? Well, in the first place, King Ahab, who was not a very faithful king to Yahweh, he had forsaken Yahweh by yielding to his wife's faith and building temples to Baal. The worship of Baal had increased then, and Jezebel, still being a follower, was out for revenge against Elijah. He fled in terror. But even more than that fear for his life was his despair. He did not believe that those people who had been converted were going to remain faithful. They would follow the next miracle or victory or spectacular drama that came along. They would, as Paul Simon said, bow and pray to the next neon god. So Elijah, having done all he knew how to do, felt all alone and defeated. His words, like silent raindrops, fell and echoed in the walls of silence. It made me wonder, too, how Jesus felt after his own spectacular miracle of healing of that poor man living among the tombs who was possessed by demons, a legion of demons. Oh, the healed man was grateful. He went around proclaiming what Jesus had done for him, but no one else did. The people were so filled with fear that they begged Jesus to go away. The swineherds told it far and wide, but their message was surely not going to be positive. Jesus had, after all, done away with their herd of pigs, and they would have to go back to tell their masters that they had lost their and the master's entire livelihood. Not good news. I believe that the group Disturbed was right in releasing the 50-year-old song. I believe it is our song, too, for we, the church, have been called not to silence, but to prophecy. Simon again, The words of the prophets are written on subway walls and tenement halls and whispered in the sounds of silence, and in the border walls and the cages and the internment camps that we said would never, ever happen again. These words must not be whispered. What we hear in the silence, when the noise of the wind and the earthquake and the fire have passed, what we hear in the moments of sheer silence may well be our marching orders. But silence is a paradox. We need the moments of silence, the time away from the noise and chaos, when we are able to hear the voice of God. But we are not meant to stay silent. There are times when we must speak. Paul Simon said, "Silence grows like a cancer." There are other voices that are so loud, so deafening with their hate speech and contempt for human life. And if those voices are the only ones, then loud and strident wins, violence wins. Simple, unreflective solutions win. Build walls to keep anyone who is different out, give guns to everyone, point fingers and blame, label, and categorize, and lose our souls. Elijah used his moment of silence well. He listened deeply, then casting off his despondence and his doubts about his worth, he set out to speak God's truth to the Israelites and to the powers of darkness, following Yahweh's command to go forth and anoint new kings and a new prophet. Jesus returned to Galilee for more healing and teaching. In his teachings, in his actions, he taught that the greatest commandment of all was to love God and to love our neighbors. He taught that all are our neighbors, even our enemies. He cared for the unloved, the outcast, and made them whole, healed, and also returned to their community. And his trip into the land of the Gerasenes gave a twofold lesson, at least twofold. One, he had dared to cross over deep into Gentile territory to show that his word was for everyone, not just for the Jews. And secondly, he healed a man who was so possessed, so ill, so divorced from his community, that we know that no one is too sick or too damaged to be saved and restored. The church, as a witness to God's unlimited and unending grace and mercy, must use its voice to call out injustice and lies, to speak against those neon gods of power and privilege. The church must talk and speak, hear and listen, showing a better way, the way of loving God and neighbor. That is the church's job. And we, my friends, are the church. May our words not be silent raindrops.